Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Grow Sessions presented by TSRgrow. I'm your host yet again, still here. They haven't kicked me out. I don't know if I'm still an interim host or a guest host or what my status is, but glad to be here. Super grateful to everybody that's been listening to the episodes and reaching out to give us feedback on how you like it or what you don't like and what kind of information you're interested in hearing more about. Today, I'm joined by an old friend, somebody I've known in the industry for many, many, many years, worked with extensively on various projects, and we worked at the same company for a little while and things like that. Great guy, Sam Andras, great architect and just a hell of a fun guy to hang out with and know and spend time with. So I'm glad to welcome you to the show, Sam.
Mark, I appreciate it, man. And TSRgrow, thank you for having me. I think you're locked in, man, as a host. You keep knocking it out of the park. It's gonna be a long-term gig. Glad to be here, man. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's funny. It's like we were talking before we started taping about like working out and some different things. And I always think like I don't work is kind of my hobby. I love what I do and I love growing plants in buildings and in greenhouses and I love the mechanics behind it and I just love everything about it. So this has become doing this, an hour once a month or whatever we do to do the show has become like a hobby for me. It's something I look forward to doing, and I get to have these just really interesting conversations and pick people's brains and chop it up about things that we all enjoy and we all love. And that's how you and I met, right? We were both on a cannabis cultivation project many many years ago, and that's where we met. And I know you're an architect, right? You've been an architect for how many years have you been an architect?
Lord. Uh, 1996, I licensed. My career began in construction and then went into architecture and Florida A&M graduate, Tallahassee, Florida, go Rattlers. Uh, you know, Long career. And yeah, man, our work together goes back, you know, over a decade, man. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, in this industry over a decade. And yeah, I like to think of myself now with the third act as a recovering architect.
Yeah, you're what if you're a recovering architect, what does that mean? Like what does that entail?
For me, like I built the firm, I had 30 something people. I had, offices in 3 states and got to a point, sold it with your help to Urban Grow. Worked there with you and with the team for a few years and then kind of decided that, hey, there's certain things that I believe are really my forte, especially in the cannabis industry, with architecture. But I didn't want to have all the employees and the responsibility of fully developing the drawings. I felt like more my sweet spot was at early assistance in visioning and developing vision aligned solutions, pulling the right teams together, and then helping clients ensure that vision was delivered in a finished product. And so that's really what third act is. I always thought when I opened it that I was going to be a sole proprietorship and it'd be a one-man show. But I think a couple months ago, Dad kind of went their way, and Jeff Lair was out there looking for something to do, and Jeff and I are now third act.
Cool. That's awesome. Um, so, yeah, like you said, I mean, we met on a project maybe 10 years ago. Gosh, it seems like yesterday really, but the way that we were going about things 10 years ago, and the early sort of days of going to commercial scale cultivation, whatever you want to label that, whether it's 10,000 square feet of canopy or 100,000 square feet of canopy, or it's somewhere in there, it's somewhere in that universe of space. And as we started to get into those things, one of the things that made me want to learn architecture, want to learn, more about architecture, want to learn more about MEP, the engineering side of things, and that, right? Because I had sort of this hands-on experience of those things, but I didn't really have the knowledge, and I didn't really speak the language. And what would happen is I'd be on projects, and oftentimes we'd be at an OAC meeting, and then the engineer would call me after the fact and say, "Hey, can you explain what's going to happen when you put all the water in the room?" And be like, well, I can, but I can as a layman, and you're being paid as an engineer." And then I'd end up doing it because I felt like if I didn't do it, then maybe I'd lose the deal or get out of control. But then they turn around and blame people, and things were very messy back then, right? Like we were making mistakes and we were learning lessons, figuring a lot of things out on the fly, spending a lot of money to do it. What are the biggest things that you've seen change in the approach and the building methodology, the outcomes? Like, what are the big differences 10 years in?
That's a great question, man. I think that, you know, I think that this industry still has bad actors, but I think that where the industry has evolved, how many technologies do you see, new technologies every day in the industry? 10, 15, the shiny objects. I think that the industry has got better at understanding that those are new technologies and they're not proven and they need to be vetted before they're integrated. I think that when you look at MSOs across the country, the leadership changes based on growth and reflection, are strengthening the core of the teams, their values, who's involved and who's qualified to lead them in the right direction. I think that evolution is absolutely due to companies looking back at where they came from, what they went through, where they are now, and how they want to go forward. And that's a big change because it's very positive and impactful in a positive way for the industry.
Yeah, I would agree. I do see, a lot of growth, a lot of reflection, right? And I think that, when taken honestly, right, and you can say, hey, yeah, we made these mistakes, as long as you haven't run out of money by the time you figure out you made the mistake, you can always correct for it. It's what always drives me nuts is the old, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And
Yeah,
you
I
see
mean,
it too
I
often.
think about like back in 2014, I worked with Mike Dundas. At the time, it was Sierra Naturals, and designed a 26,000 square foot vertically integrated facility for him. And that was a third job I was working on. I really didn't know anything about plant movement or plant spacing, needs in a facility. And I remember, that facility got operational maybe 3 years after it was operating. I had by that time probably done, 30 or 40 more facilities and walking through, and I'm kind of walking through, like hiding, hiding myself. But in live and learn, I think that the cool thing is, that experience is really the spectacles of what you've done, looking back over the mistakes you made, and exactly what you said, not making them again. So, I think in that way the industry has evolved. I think that, back when you and I were first working on projects, the way to calc room size was okay, you take your flower square footage and veg is 25% of that, mom is 12.5% of that. And now we really look at metrics. What is plant spacing? What's your veg schedule? How many square feet, are you going to have in mom, veg, flower? How many clones? How long for that mom to recover? And those are things that only came over time and realizing that not every grower grows the same way. Those methodologies change, and with that, facility design has to change.
Yeah. And you make a good point, right? Like there's I don't know if I want to say there's so many different cultivation styles, but there's a lot of different ways that people approach it, right? And whether that's difference in media or how they're going to water and fertigate, or lighting obviously has a huge impact on the overall project. Again, like you said, whether they're, are they vegging for 4 weeks, or are they vegging for 17 days, right? Um, are they vegging for something short? Those things all make such a difference. And when you're coming in as an architect, as a consultant early in a project, and you're meeting early with probably right C-level type folks, investor type folks, maybe the cultivation folks are engaged in those early discussions, and you're learning about these different ways they want to approach operating a building. How do you navigate those different requests and those different choices? Like, how does that impact the work you're going to provide?
I think that for me, one of the things I like to do is look at a cultivation methodology and look at the impact on the overall facility. I think one thing that holds true to this day is that everybody knows that your money's in flower, right? So the old adage of maximize flower, that's still alive and well. But maximizing flower can't come at the expense of veg, mom, trim, pure, dry, packaging. So how do you balance those things? And I think that that's where I like to really integrate with operators, with the team, and talk about the what ifs. How do you maximize flower while maintaining the right size rooms, the right spaces to make sure that the throughput is accomplished in the right way. And then to looking at things like CGMP compliance and segregation of space and functional flow, things like that. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's really, it's interesting when you're working through these projects. I mean, in a project, I'm dealing with everything from transformer upgrades and large heavy power systems coming in, big switch gear, so millions of dollars worth of equipment on that side, all the way down to, the other day I spent 45 minutes just talking about doorknobs and how, door
Mhm.
hardware integrates to the security system, and making sure that what we're choosing for hardware and what we're choosing for security vendor, that those things align. Because what always would drive me nuts on projects is right when you get to that, you can see, I always say, you can see the green light at the end of the tunnel. You're right about to get plants in the building. You're so close, you can taste it. The budget is damn near zero at that point. The money's been spent. You want to get plants going, and some little thing that wasn't integrated properly in design trips you up, right? The doors won't lock, and so you
Right.
can't get your approval to bring plants in because your mag locks aren't connecting properly, or your strikers aren't working, or little, it's always like at the very tail end, it's always little stuff like that. And
Right.
so it's really interesting on these projects, right, that you really got to integrate and worry about all of it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great point, man. Or if somebody forgot to put the fertigation drawings in the building set, and so now all of a sudden you've got a six-figure change order, those all of those things are avoidable, right? They're avoidable when you're checking the right boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say, you want to have the right people at the right table at the right time. And so for you, when you're getting involved in a project, who are the people you're looking to pull in and draw from and work with?
So, again, with third act, I'm, I got the role that Jeff and I like to play. It's more of a project manager or owner's rep. And in a way, it's that safety net to make sure that the right questions are being asked, that the vision is delivered at the end of the day, that the goals, the needs, the budget, the schedule, that those things are what are delivered. So as the project begins to evolve, we're working with the client to understand, how do you want to deliver it? Is it going to be CM at risk? Is it going to be design build? Is it going to be design bid build? And then based on that, we're going out and we're competitively bringing in the architects, engineers, contractors, cultivation, consulting team if that's needed, and really filling the piece of the puzzle with the right people. And we like to do qualification based because not every project is the same. Not everybody's workload is the same, right? And so, making sure you've got the right team, and then you get to the end, maybe an interview with one or two firms because personalities are a big deal, right? So, it's that full team integration. I'll tell you personally, I love CM at risk. I love design build. I love something where contractors involved early and you're working as a team all the way through, because you really are investigating value engineering and, I'd say best options for meeting that budget, meeting the needs, meeting the schedule as an entire team as you go through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I've seen, you've seen, we've all seen facilities that are just built to like the max, right? Like the most expensive facility, I won't say who owned it, but it was like $600 a square foot. It was fully automated. It was the flooring was like the nicest flooring with the coves and all the things and the positive pressure. And I mean, it was a completely sanitary environment. The flower was garbage. I've seen grows that literally my favorite grow ever was one who you and I both know who ran this one, but it was on the East Coast and it was very early days and it was built into an old Napa auto parts building and it was pretty rough and the flower was just gorgeous, right? Just absolutely stellar. Where do we land? Where do you land on the like what does it cost to build these things? What do you really need to invest in? Like where's the money spent that matters, right? Like if you can see a shitbox grow fire and the most expensive spaceship grow in the world grow garbage, how do you get to the middle on that?
Another great question, man. It's like you've been through this ringer. Yeah. um, you know, I think that I don't care who it is I'm talking to, they always start with, I want to grow top shelf cannabis, right? But not many people talk about, they don't want to share what their CAPEX is because they think if they share, you're going to spend every dime. And not many look at OPEX. I think OPEX in today's market is a huge deal, right? Because prices are getting driven so low. So how much it actually takes to produce a pound of high quality cannabis, that matters, you know. So, I think that when you start to look at what is actually the capex and what are the goals, what are you trying to produce, how are you trying to maintain an OPEX or drive that OPEX downward, then you can begin to look at the systems that can be employed, incorporated into a facility. I mean, at the end of the day, can you afford to put a CHP, generate your own power, take the facility off the grid, and now you're free of all the rate hikes, peaks, and high usage times. Are you looking at systems that are more mechanical systems that are more efficient on the energy because you're in a low cost for gas area versus a high cost for electric? So you're looking at, a gas fired chiller, or even if you're using electric, do you have gas reheat? Or are you structured such that you have to, really look at standard DX, so supplemental dehumidification. And then once you kind of get the feel for where those things are going to fall, then the goal is to design that facility to be absolutely the best thing to be, utilizing the systems that are going to be in it, and making sure that everybody, I think, too, key to it, understands how to operate it and how to maintain it. I mean, you probably walked in facilities where the maintenance, like trying to change a filter, you feel like a squirrel crawling through an attic trying to get to a filter. And the reality is, if you can't maintain it, it's going to fail. You know, if you make it easy, it's going to be easy and people will do it. If not, and technology is the same way. If people don't know how to operate the technology, they're not, they're going to fail. It's not going to work the way you want it to.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's an interesting point. I mean, I've definitely seen it where it's not the cost to build out, it's not the CapEx, it's the OPEX that's the killer. Yeah, the operating costs. And if you're not thinking about operating costs and design, and to your point, if you're not thinking about things like how do we change the filter? How do we maintain this stuff, right? This stuff that runs 24/7 and just never shuts down and is in need of preventive maintenance. How do we get into to change that? How do we swap things out? Yeah, that's where, yeah, I've definitely seen things kind of fall apart. So it's really good to hear, right? Because I definitely take the same tact, which is let's think about it in design. Let's think about it in that SDDD stage of design, like before we get to the permit set. Let's think about these things and talk through them, and have that consciousness of the group of designers and engineers and the growers and the post processing harvest people, and like how are we moving through this. I mean, we just ran into it the other day. I was looking at wanting to keep a switchgear where it is currently in the building, and it was kind of going to impede on a hallway, so we moved the wall around, but then we're thinking, well, but where this door is, it actually goes into a double door set that where you're going to have to move carts through there, and you can't, it's tight, it's doable, like, yeah, but if we just move this door down 6 feet, now you avoid it entirely, right? And I think it's little things like that in design, if people are thinking about it, that really go a long way towards how the facility operates when you turn it on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most fun projects that I think we had an opportunity to work on together, Southern Sky Brands down in Mississippi. And,
Yeah.
you think about the mechanical setup on that building where we did the mezzanine and we put all the air handling equipment up on that mezzanine, and they access it from the shipping receiving bay. They're totally outside of the work zones. Those units are indoors. They're going to last for a long time. And, they have a work area up there. They're able to change filters super easy. And, I mean, you don't see that in every facility. There's a cost associated with it, but what is the payback on that cost?
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking the time to evaluate that is a meaningful study. Yeah.
It is absolutely. And part of the thing is that a lot of times it's very hard to evaluate that in real time given the timeline that we have, right? Typically it's like you wait, okay, now go. And now it's like, you go from this project is too expensive to this project is taking too long phase very quickly, right? and it's in there that the accuracy gets missed, right? The old adage of, you can have it cheap, fast, and accurate, but you can't have all three.
Right.
Right. And so it's that balancing act of how do you pull that off? So I was thinking like to the building and building costs and kind of what we're putting into these things and all the requirements. For a while there were some facilities that we saw that were being built to maybe GMP specs that were being, certainly in Europe, I think a lot of those facilities and any of the facilities that can export. So like Canadian facilities that can export to European countries tend to have those requirements of the EU GMP and these, so it's like everything from flooring to how the rooms are sealed to where the sinks are located and how things drain and all that kind of stuff. There was some talk, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of a naysayer on things, but it was funny when the whole like talk of Sched 3, executive order or whatever came about. It was really clear if you watched the market that everybody bought the news and sold, or what does it say? Bought the hype and sold the news, right? If you watch the cannabis stock ticker. And so nobody got overly excited, right? They just sort of bought that cycle and sold it off right when it came out. But if we find ourselves, and I think eventually we find ourselves in a federally regulated type of market, right? I don't know when. Nobody knows when. I don't think nobody has that view through the crystal ball. But if we do, right, and let's say we go to Sched 3, which is not where I would want to be in a Sched 3. I want to be deregulated, treated like alcohol and tobacco, basically, would be where I think we should be. But let's say we're at Sched 3. I look at that list of Sched 3, and it's like ketamine, codeine, whatever. I don't know a lot of mom and pop producers of ketamine. Um, I'm not even sure what ketamine is used for, to be honest with you. But the reality is that it's like a pharmaceutical, right? It's manufactured in a pharmaceutical way. It's in that list. So now if cannabis goes to that list, what does that mean? Like, are you looking at that at all? Like, are you running into that? Are you running into people that want to plan for that and how they're designing and building their facilities?
I I think that, I mean, you framed it in a great way. It like, how do you look at it? How do what does it mean to cannabis, right? Because rescheduling, I mean, in actuality, like rescheduling and when you start to look at like the FDA 21 CFR parts 210 and part 211, right? That is, that literally is for the pharmaceutical industry. That's what it's for. And it part 210, what it all means, part 211, how it applies. Um, to me, I guess the the question I wonder, you know, is like if if under Schedule 3, say somebody wants to submit a a idea, they want to do testing, they want to submit it to the FDA to see if they can get a pharmaceutical approved by the FDA. Doesn't have to be done in a uh, CGMP certified facility at that point in time. But if it were approved to produce it and distribute it, now they have to comply. And now you have the FDA oversight, right? But I think that so where I'm going is say that the FDA isn't going to suddenly come in because you reschedule and start, you know, inspecting facilities. They're worried about pharmaceuticals. But the question I have, I ask you, if you're in a state like Florida that is medical, what does rescheduling mean? If if suddenly cannabis is now viewed as a potentially pharmaceutical drug, right? Not Schedule 1, Schedule 3. what does that mean to policy and procedures, especially in states where you're medical? I mean, you look at the regulations in states, Florida has some level of CGMP. New York is the most stringent. They require CGMP and they require third party validation of GMP. The biggest problem with GMP state by state is that who's regulating it. In Florida, it's a Department of Health. Well, the Department of Health does restaurants and they go in, they look at surfaces, but they certainly aren't looking at that would apply to a vertically integrated cannabis operation where you have singular flow, or you have the risk of cross contamination, so you don't want to have like you know manufacturing off of the same corridor as cultivation, things like that. um, I guess the question is, how could it, you know, where could the impact be, and is there that potential?
Yeah, yeah. It's such an unknown, and it's such a time when, the industry is widely sort of cap constrained when it comes to any even new markets, right? Or expanding in existing markets and these types of things. And so, some of these bells and whistles that you would need to have in order to be UGMP or CGMP cert, you kind of, don't necessarily need them, right? To operate cleanly, to operate safely. And so, the question for me becomes, do you all of a sudden have a situation where there's a bunch of facilities that need to invest a lot of money to come up to those standards and make a bunch of changes, right? Whether it's segregation of space, whether it's, the flooring and coving, whether it's any of these, gasketed ceilings, any of these things that fall into that category. And largely it's on the processing, side of things, but it trickles into, your cultivation side of things as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it makes any sense that I don't know if any of it makes any sense. If I'm being honest with you, none of it makes any fucking sense.
Yeah,
Like,
I
let's
hear
just be
you, man.
honest. But the reality is that if people are thinking that way, or I'd be curious. And I've never seen a cannabis grow in Europe. I've seen plenty of greenhouses over there growing tomatoes and plants and different things. I've never seen a cannabis grow over there, but I have seen that a lot of those are built to certain spec. And yeah, I'd be curious, it's if that's the way we're going to go, but again, like, I've been in these clean room type facilities that, it's doesn't really impact the value of the crop. It doesn't really impact the quality, right? In
Right.
a positive way. I mean, so often it's the horse, or it's what is it? It's the jockey, not the horse, right? It's the people running it. It's the growers and the people doing processing, and the leadership and the people who are showing up every day. I mean, that's really where the difference is made. That's where the passion for what they're doing and the love of what they're doing reflects in the plant, I think, right? um that's at least been what I've seen.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, in a way, it's two different things, right? I think that there are ways to implement GMP in cultivation or vertically integrated facilities that is not cost prohibitive, right? So, is there cost associated with CGMP? Sure. And really, when you talk about cultivation, purely cultivation, CGMP really doesn't have a lot of application, more GACP, good agriculture and collection practices, and but the aspects of GMP that are going to apply in cultivation are the cleanable surfaces, the the singular direction flow, things that when you think about it in the baseline of what we try and do is good design, you're going to go from mom to clone to prop to veg to flower to dry, right? So you're creating that singular flow. Where facilities fail is when they have a single shipping receiving bay. And so all their plant medium is coming in going one direction, but then the plant traffic and growth is going the other direction. So how do you solve it? You have a receiving bay only, where you're bringing in your nutrients, you're bringing in your medium, and then you begin the singular flow all the way through. When you think about like EU GMP, right? Now you're talking about like total segregation of employees. So you've got a locker room for your cultivation staff. You've got a locker room for your trim and packaging folks, and a locker room for your manufacturing folks. The the killer to a locker room is you come in from the outside and you're in a dirty corridor and you have a door in, you go in the locker room again, and you come back out right into that dirty corridor, and then you open the door into the clean environment off of the dirty corridor and walk your dirty ass in.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's it's kind of a killer. But I think the other things in cultivation are utilizing systems and technology that, equipment that's easily clean, just like the materials, easily clean surfaces, equipment where you have verifiable data that can be collected and stored. So, your environmental controls and your mechanical lighting systems that, like here we're talking about, we're on TSRgrow podcast, their system with the drivers outside the room make their lighting easier to clean. The data collection, data storage is, a great component of a GMP type system. And so, it's thinking like that. And I think honestly, for you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, right? But you said it's coming, right? Well, what's coming and where are we going? And how do you get ahead of the game? That to me is a big question for operators. I think that personally the greatest position somebody can be in is taking the time to gain the knowledge to understand if things happen, what do you do to react? What kind of capital investment? How do you make changes in order to meet the changes in policy and regulation? I think just sitting back and waiting is not the solution. You can't succeed by sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see what happens. Kick the field goal on 4th and 1, get your 3 points, and
yeah. Don't bring that up, Sam. That still hurts. I couldn't believe you didn't take those 3 points. I'm just brokenhearted sitting here in Boulder, Colorado, watching that game, and it broke my heart. That's terrible of you to bring it up, Sam. It's very hurtful. So so is that like if you could give someone that's entering either because there's two facets, right? You've got people that are still entering, kind of getting into a cultivation facility for the first time. They're building, right? Like in Minnesota, there's licenses being issued, and there's folks that have never built a grow, operated a commercial grow before, and then you've got groups that are expanding in states like Virginia, maybe, right, where there's changing in laws there, or Florida, where it seems like I can't get over the amount of cannabis Florida can consume. I mean, when you factor like the production, like the amount of canopy in Florida, and then it seems like it keeps growing. The dispensary count keeps growing. That seems to be true. But so you've got two ends of the coin, right? You've got people that are experienced, been operating, building and operating facilities for many, many years, I guess you'd say. And then you got people that are brand new. What's the advice you would give? And is it different depending on how they're coming into a project?
So I think that again, go back to 2014 when I did my first facility. I had no idea functional flow and metrics and all the needs. I think that probably 2017 I had a pretty good understanding of cultivation methodologies, their impact on facilities, how plants move through manufacturing, how that happens and the different types of manufacturing, anything from edibles, non-edibles into beverages and whatever. And I think at that point in time, one of the first questions in that questionnaire that I would send at a engagement would be, is GMP important to you? I think today that question's still in there. But today, if they, check the box no, I try and take a little time to tell them why it should be. And then, look at first off, the little C on GMP, that stands for current. So current good manufacturing practices, right? That means that they can change it at any time. So all you're doing is designing for current. I think that for an operator coming into the space who's designing new to understand what are the implications of doing a design that's not CGMP compliant, or where the gaps exist, to understand what they would need to do to upgrade that facility to make it CGMP compliant. And I think that that's really a great starting point, is to look at, hey, you don't need to, there's no regulations other than like those in Florida or those in New York, but if you're in a state that doesn't have GMP regs, then designing smart design where your functional flows supports an easy change. Maybe you're changing out some systems and equipment. Maybe your data collection is different, but making sure that you're doing SOP aligned design that supports a GMP philosophy. That's a good starting point. And then helping them understand where those gaps exist and what the CAPEX would be to upgrade and be fully compliant.
So, yeah, when you look at that, right, the CGMP stuff and all that, right, is a pretty it's a micro, it's minutia in the grand scheme of the project, right? Like it can be because it's something that you're not necessarily have to do. And so I'm curious for people, maybe let's say like Minnesota, right? I'm working on a project in Minnesota right now. I know there's a lot of other folks that have projects of various sizes. What's your advice to somebody just getting started, like in a state like Minnesota that's maybe new to, design, build operations of a commercial scale grow?
Understand the risk. Ask, ask if if my does my design will my design meet GMP, and what will I need to do to get it there? I mean, New York, Florida, New Jersey, um, Michigan, they all have some level of GMP, New York being the most stringent. But those states that don't, just understanding risk. The good old days are gone, man. Those days of you could build anything and you were going to make money. Those days are gone. And so I think it's important that people understand exactly what they're embarking on and what they're getting, you know. And then I think that, folks that have existing operations, evaluating those one on the, I mean, a really good evaluation is not just going to look at CGMP or GACP. I mean, it's going to look at, um, is the facility under the current mechanical, under the current metrics of the building, is it performing the best it can perform, or are there ways to tweak it, with what you have to make it even better? And so what I think is very valuable in this industry is, like a property condition assessment, looking at exactly what you have, the conditions of materials and systems and equipment, including the cultivation, addressing deficiencies in a written report, and looking at what a capital expenditure plan would look like over a 10-year period, based on prioritizing the needs to get to a finish level, and it's that kind of planning that I think will make businesses successful. If they aren't planning for the future, if you're stagnant, you're dying. You got to be planning.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I certainly feel like there's been maybe 4 or 5 pretty hard pivots over the last sort of 15 years, 16 years that I've been involved in commercial scale facilities and in licensing and involved in state by state legalization and the market in general, right? Like we've definitely seen it um do hard pivots a couple, more than a couple of times. And so there's another one coming, right? And I hear that, that you get a plan for it. We know something's gonna happen. We know something big will change and take us in a direction that we have to be prepared for. So one of the questions that I have for you, as this always kind of rattles around in my head, is do you feel that there's a sweet spot? So this is a little bit different, but do you feel there's a sweet spot on size and canopy size, and which of course dictates building size dependent on some of your choices? But you from time to time you hear people say, anything over 10,000 flower is too much. It's not, it's not controllable. It's not this, it's not that. Or, they'll say, well, 15,000 is like my sweet spot. But then you've got, grows out there that are 100,000 square feet of canopy plus. So what do you think about that? Or do you think about that?
I do. I think that, shoot, man, I've done micro grows all the way up to, hundreds of thousands of square feet. And um, yeah, I'd say honestly, man, I've seen facilities that are 10,000 square feet not properly operated, that, the quality's not there, the not just quality, but the yields. They're being outperformed by much larger facilities. I think, again, analyzing process, flow, um, I remember visiting, and I'm not going to name names, but a facility in Massachusetts. And I thought one of the coolest things about it was a fairly large size operation. And what they did, they divided their grow teams, their cultivation into teams, and they had competitions within, each of them would get 2 flower rooms, and, competitions on yields, on quality, and the ones who would win, the harvest or whatever, however they were, whether it was quarterly or semi-annual, they get a bonus. And I thought that was a really cool way to do things, because then you sit down and you analyze, okay, well, what are they doing differently that increase their quality, increase their yield to make them perform, and they share information, and it's, better in the company. So I think that, you've said it a number of times in this, that, the people, they're the heart and soul of the operation, right? So, how do you get down into the weeds with them and understand what isn't working, no matter what size that canopy is, and what is working. I'll tell you that, just for the hell of it, in Florida, I went to three different dispensaries and bought, numerous eights just to see what I get. And I got home and I opened them up and looked at what I got. And, you know, one of them had stems. It was awful, man. I'll send you a
Freaking,
picture of it. I had a stem that was probably an inch and a half long in an eighth.
yeah. Yeah. So, it's funny when we talk about like the people, right? And like on the design side, that's something I'm always looking at is, how far is it to get to a bathroom? What's the break room like? There's so many facilities where, like we said early on, the flower, it's flower, 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 right? Flower space, flower space, flower space. And I had a building where we had some existing restrooms that we could have torn out to get a little bit, more flower canopy in this one side of it. But, decided I really advocated for keeping it because if we took those out, the other set of bathrooms were going to be really far away.
Right.
And, just like not only the trouble and the pain in the ass that is when you like in the far back of the building and you got to use the bathroom and you got to walk a mile to go do that, but it's also like the time that takes, right? Like how much time are people spending tending to their needs rather than or what I mean, like and are we thinking
The
about it? So
OPEX,
yeah.
absolutely, dude.
Yeah, so I love that, in your mindset, right, as you're looking at design and you're looking at the advising these groups on that sort of thing, you're thinking about that, right? You're thinking about
Right,
how does this decision impact not only operations and sort of that OPEX number that's really easy to see, right? It costs us X for power, it costs us Y for gas, it costs us, $1 million a year for baggies and gloves and consumables and blah blah blah. But it's also that like have I inconvenienced the humans? I
right.
made it harder to do the job. And what that's a hidden OPEX, right? You
Right.
really can't see that.
Well,
Um,
you hit on a great point when you talk about the bathrooms in the cultivation area, ease of access. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've run across, oh, we can't do that because we can't have a bathroom, in the same area as cultivation. Well, yeah, you can, as long as you think about how it's in there, that you have the right sanitation procedures and gowning and cleaning so that people can go in, do their business, and go back to work in a sanitized and clean way.
yeah,
And it's things like that it when you talk about the mentality of somebody who's like, what a pain in the ass. I have to walk, 200 yards, hit a bathroom, have to walk 200 yards back. Where's their mindset when they're, or are they not even going to go and just sit there and hold it? And,
be uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's like,
exactly.
are some people just being uncomfortable? Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I like to think about all of those things, right? So it's such a fun space to build in because it is everything from, how do we get 4 megs of power into a building that doesn't have it, down to the doorknobs and locks to the bathroom locations, and how does that impact flow and work and people, and at the end of the day, happy people, happy plants, and the goal is happy plants, right? Like that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So, happy, clean, high quality. So one of the things that I'd love to just touch on with you, so is like, third act, what how do people get a hold of you, first of all, if they want to talk to you about architecture and consulting and these types of things that you're into these days?
706-573-5520.
Um,
www.thirdactarchitecture.com.
I love that you just gave your phone number. That's the
Oh,
best.
heck yeah, man. Call me
Yeah.
24/7, man.
24/7, ready to talk architecture, consulting, third acts, What else? Cannabis cultivation. And so with that, what you're offering, you're working with people in any state, anywhere, anytime, or what are you
Yep.
doing? You just focus on geography?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Work with people all over the country. I've worked in Macedonia. I was in Thailand earlier this year, and I love it, man. For me, I mean, back in the day when I first started my business, I was local, state, federal government, healthcare, corporate, some industrial. And I was, 15 years in and got into cannabis. And it was like this new, exciting, cool industry. And that hasn't changed. It just continues to evolve in beautiful ways. And the people in this industry, it's such a tight-knit, cool community. You know, you know you get to know people. It's just an amazing group of people. I love being a part of it. Yeah,
Awesome, man. Well, I think that says it all about you, Sam. I've enjoyed working with you over the years, my friend. I've enjoyed our conversation today. Thanks so much for joining me. And yeah, thank you. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I appreciate your time, brother, and thank you. And look forward to working with you in the future.
Everybody, have a great day.
You too, man. Bye bye.